Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well this lovely Tuesday morning. My name is Lindo, and I'm part of the client success team at Telmar, working across Europe, Asia, and Africa. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone joining us today, and welcome to the Wi-Fi team, Stuart, Julianne, and Brandon. We at Telmar are delighted to host another BrandMapp webinar focusing on audience and media intelligence solutions. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us. Our speaker today is Brandon de Kock, who is the Director of Storytelling for Wi-Fi Insights, and there's literally no one who knows the data, the BrandMapp data, better than him. BrandMapp is now in its 10th year, and the latest set of data was just released in January this year. So we're once again very pleased to have Brandon with us today to talk you through some of the major trends and behavioral shifts that they see in the consumer landscape for 2024. The agenda for today is navigating through population shifts and consumer trends, focusing on the tech space and what's changed, big consumer trends you can't ignore, are the rich getting richer, who's winning in the grocery aisles, which post-COVID habits have stuck, and whether there are any black swans we need to track. This is an interactive session, so please feel free to post any questions, queries, and comments that you may have on the chat line, and the team will answer them. Thank you. Over to you, Brandon.
I think I was muted. Am I unmuted?
You are
Yes,
unmuted.
we can hear you.
Excellent. How's it, everybody? And good morning. How's it, Linda? Thank you for that intro. Yeah, what a pleasure to be back here on the Telmar platform with whoever's online. Hopefully, looking forward to an enthralling. This is the most complicated way I can think of ever titling a presentation. So navigating population shifts, consumer trends, and the shifting sands and landscape. Well, that's what I was going to call it. But I've been rolling this data out now for the last month or so. And recently I did a presentation for one of our clients, Libstar Foods, and I came up with a slightly better way of describing how I'm going to try and explain the context of BrandMapp this year. And I'm going to call this presentation "How to Spot Banthas on Tatooine," which is a bit weird for those of you who are not Star Wars fans. It's a Star Wars reference. Tatooine is obviously the planet that Luke Skywalker was born on and grew up on. And I did the conference presentation for them at a time when they had decided to have this whole Star Wars theme. So I came up with this picture because I'll get into a moment. For those of you who don't know exactly what BrandMapp is, I've got a very short explanation of it. But in terms of context, which I think is vitally important always, is like that's where we start with our data. Collecting data is easy. Giving the data context, and in this case, the context is the South African consumer landscape, or at least a portion of it. I think that's arguably the most important thing. And one of the things that we've seen this year is it feels like we're in a bit of a desert. It feels like there's a very, very slowly shifting sands on this consumer landscape that we see this year. It's probably the flattest data I've ever seen. There were times when I was looking through the first run and going, oh, hang on, am I using this year or last year's data? And it was pretty flat. And I'll explain that to you. So where do the banthas come in? Well, the banthas are those strange creatures there the sand riders ride around on the desert planet of Tatooine. And the thing is, it's actually quite easy to spot banthas on Tatooine because it's a completely flat landscape. So for those of us who enjoy data and enjoy working with data, what's lovely about this year is that in such a flat landscape, when things do stand out, they really stand out quite starkly. And I'm going to try and explain that for you a little bit today and show you a little bit. Those of you who were with us last year will remember I was talking about ski slopes last year and how looking at these trends where things are kind of clearly sharply rising is a good way of using data. This year, what I'm really enjoying is kind of looking for these banthas on the landscape. Okay, so let me leap in. We always start with the same place. My mates at Kintaro always say, please, will you come up with a different way of showing this picture? But there's just no better way of showing it. Okay. So the beginning piece of the story is where does the South African consumer landscape sit right now, the whole thing? So first of all, we've got two really interesting contextual data points right now. The first one is that 43 million adults anyone who's heard me speak for the last 10 years will know that we've always said that any population extrapolations, any numbers you see about how many people there are in South Africa are all based on this census that was done in 2011. And very, very clever people sit down and work out algorithms that they then apply to work out what the population growth is. Up until last year, of course, when we finally got another census. And I must fall on my sword and say that anything nasty I said about those clever people, I have to take back, because it turns out that they were incredibly close, apparently, to the actual number that came back from the census, which should be very comforting for those of us who rely on data to lead us into the future. It looks like we did quite a good job. So, as best as we know, there are now 43 million adults in South Africa. We can say that with some certainty. The 3.5 trillion rand that we earn every year is a completely different source that comes from National Treasury. And I'm going to dig deeper into that just now. But we know those two things to be facts, as good a fact as we can find. So, same old picture, same old desert that I'm showing you that's existed for many years. If we take the 43 million adults and we split them up, we split up South Africa into household income groups. We're looking at a group of 70% of all adults. That's 30 million South Africans living in households earning less than 10,000 Rand a month, right? Inside of that group, about 56% of those people rely 100% on social grants to put food on the table. 25% of them never have enough food to feed the whole family. 25% of them seldom have enough food to feed the whole family. And more than half of them don't actually have a bank account of any sort. So this is the struggling masses. And we desperately need a way of uplifting them as we move into the future. The next group is what we call the middle market. So that's about 25% of the adult population, roughly 10 million people living in households earning 10 to 40,000 Rand a month. They're important because that's the beginning of the tax-paying threshold, okay? And then right at the top, you got this tiny group of just 5%, 3 million adults living in households earning 40,000 Rand a month or more. We typically call them the top end. What is important about these groups of people is when you take the 3.5 trillion Rand earned every year and you look on the right-hand side, you'll see that the top 5%, that little group at the top, take home more than half of all the formal income earned in South Africa. Okay. So this is the Gini coefficient you're looking at. These numbers, for the astute observer out there, have not changed much in the last year, 2 years, 3 years. But some of them have crucially, I see I'm rounding up some of these figures, and there are a few places here where the numbers actually do change quite a lot. One of them is in the 2 trillion at the top, because there's a couple of 100 billion extra Rand being earned at the top of that triangle. The other place that's different is that the 3 million is very much rounded up. So it was 3 million last year and it's 3 million this year. But the difference is last year it was 2.8 rounded up to 3. This year it's more like 3.1 or 3.2. Okay. So there are shifts and there are interesting things that have happened here. We have always believed that understanding this top piece of the triangle, this top 30%, is incredibly important, because the 70% at the bottom who rely on social grants, who rely on some kind of economic activity to hopefully pull them up through this triangle, if that top 30% is in real trouble, then nothing's going to happen. Okay. So at BrandMapp, what we've done for the last 10 years is we have focused our activities on understanding this top 30% of the triangle. Doesn't mean we think that the 70% of adults living in households earning under 10,000 Rand is unimportant. Quite the contrary, they are vital. But this thing here, this triangle, man, if those people aren't healthy, wealthy, and doing okay, and aspirational, and just a bit resilient, then we really are in real trouble, because sitting inside that is 85% of all formal income and 100% of all personal taxes. Okay, so that's the group of people that we are talking about. So everything that I say from now on, the context of it is with a filter on it. When I say respondents or people or the BrandMapp audience or South Africans even, I'm only talking about those adults sitting inside these top two pieces of the triangle. And that's the work that we do every year. Okay, so we go out into the marketplace, we ask as many people as we possibly can to take a survey. That survey is an extensive piece of work. It delves into all of the things we can imagine that are interesting about them as individuals, where they're at in life, their financial portfolios, all the way down to their primary banks and secondary banks, and where they've got unit trusts with. We cover as many shopper graphics as we can. How are they behaving as consumers? Their loyalty habits, where they eat, where they drink, what they eat, what they drink, where they shop for groceries, etc. And then the final third of the survey is all about media platforms and media habits. That is the subject of our webinar next week. So I'm not really talking about media in this particular webinar. I've got one little hint for you. But that's what we try to do with BrandMapp. We had 35,000 people answer the survey this year, and we believe it is our most robust piece of work ever. But it's very similar in structure and shape to the last 3 or 4 years. So that's cool because we can really start trending BrandMapp data really nicely. Okay, so let's talk about the shifts that have happened in the top piece of that triangle, because you will have read a lot of information about. Very recently, we had a stuff coming out about the growth of the economy. What is our actual economic growth? And it's pegged at like 1.2%, which is basically sliding backwards down the hill. When you start looking at the world slightly differently, though, a very interesting picture emerges. So this is just in, when I say just in, February the 28th last month, the Treasury put their budget review, tabled their budget review. It's an exciting day for those of us who are slightly sort of data geeks when it comes to things like this. And this is the table I go to every year. It's table 4.5. It is the most accurate thing that we have that tells us who's earning how much money in South Africa and how many of them there are. Okay. The table looks like this. You can go and find it for yourself. It's super interesting, but I really want to just focus on the left-hand side of this column for a moment. So what you see here is the gross taxable annual bracket. Okay, that's annual bracket. And the number of people who sit inside that bracket and what percentage of the tax base they make up. And the other columns will tell you things like what percentage of taxes they pay, which is also super interesting. The number at the very bottom of the left-hand column, 14.2, is the total number of people registered for tax. The line above it is the total number of people who actually pay any tax. Okay, so we have 7.4 million South Africans right now who pay any tax at all. If you earn under 96,000 Rand a year, you pay no tax. Okay, you're still a registered taxpayer, but you don't contribute to the tax pie. Look at the massive volume of people that sit under 150,000 Rand a month, right? There's 1.5 million individuals, 21% of the tax base. They only pay about 5% of all taxes. Okay. So what I do every year is I go to this and I try to now contextualize the work we do in BrandMapp relative to this group of income earners. And I draw these kind of lines. So if you can imagine the 10,000 Rand plus household income sits just a bit below that top line there, 150,000 Rand a year, right? The next line would be the top end, that piece of the top triangle. Definitely everybody who's personally earning 30,000 Rand a month or more, which is the 350, that starts, that's roundabout where that 40K household line would be. And the bottom line is also equally interesting because that is people who personally earn 80,000 Rand a month or more, or R1 million a year in gross. Okay. And these are the lines that I kind of obsess about every year on year, and try to work out what is actually happening in South African society in the top piece of the triangle. So this is what it looks like if I plot that over the last 5 years. I know they don't look like they're very interesting graphs. They aren't, because the x-axis is not high enough relative to the y-axis. It's the only way to plot the data. But what this shows you is the total gross growth in those 3 different groups, right? So the total 10K is effectively the whole of that top of the triangle. The gray line is effectively the little triangle at the top, and the red line at the bottom are the millionaires. That's like the people right at the top of the very top of that piece of the pyramid. So when we plot the numbers, it looks like this. You can see some interesting things. Look at the top line, which goes from 5.2 million 5 years ago to 5.8. It's not a massive amount of growth, over 5 years. The next line down is far more interesting. 2.1 million to 3.1. We've added 1 million people to that group. And the millionaires group is quite radical. We've added over 200,000 people to that group. Okay. But there's an inflationary picture at play here, right? So if CPI is running at like 6.5%, what you'd expect is the delta between each of these years to hopefully be 6.5% or more to keep pace with inflation. So let's look at the total overall picture. Well, the overall picture is that group of people that make up the top of the triangle is growing, but it's certainly not keeping pace with inflation, right? I mean, it's not doing too badly, the 7.2%, the post-COVID recovery year. But you know, this is definitely in agreement with the stories that you'll be reading about the total the economy of South Africa not growing nearly as fast as we'd like it to. But look at the next group. So this is the people sitting in the top end of that triangle. Look how rapidly that group has grown and recovered since COVID, or recovered and then grown. So 12.5% and 11.5% growth year on year is almost twice inflation, right? Those groups are growing at twice inflation. What about the millionaires? Well, the millionaires are absolutely off the charts. 22, 22, and 20% growth over the last three budget cycles. I mean, it's absolutely insane. So there are lots of possible explanations for this. It's almost the subject of a different discourse, and I'm not qualified. I'm only a humble politics student from ex-politics student from UCT. I don't really know how to explain these big economic shifts and changes. I can tell you though that the fact is the fact. And here's what it says about what's happening in South African society. We are so obsessed often in the news and in the narrative that exists out there in the public sphere about the negative stories and the worries that we have about that 70% and the trouble that they're in. And it's absolutely right that we are obsessed with that. But I believe that we should be equally obsessed with what's happening in those top two pieces of the triangle. Because if things change, if we got some kind of political intervention in this country, in our country, that allowed the tide to change, it would be great to know that there's a group of highly skilled, highly aspirational, highly educated people who are really willing and able and who've actually been doing okay. When I look at these charts, that's the story that I'm told. It feels like our society is being sort of stretched like this, where it's not that the rich are necessarily getting richer. There are more high income people arriving every year. Simple as that. Yeah. I don't doubt that tech has a big influence on this as well. I was speaking to our back end guys, our computer propeller heads that we work with, and they tell me that a starting salary for a network analyst or a systems analyst or software developer these days, coming straight out of college as a fully developed developer, you're probably looking at anywhere between 40 and 60,000 Rand starting salary, you know. So we've got a whole different thing going on at the top end of income, which is the taxpayer end of the income pie. You know, to put it in a much finer kind of lens on this, if we take the actual formal income, so on that chart I showed you at the bottom, it said total formal income was 3.543 trillion Rand. This is what that total formal market income looks like tracked over 5 years. So again, we would expect this to hopefully keep pace with that 6.5% inflation or CPI. And actually it looks like this. So if you go back to COVID, the effect of COVID, the total income, formal income made didn't recover very much. And it then rocketed up. I mean, we're doing pretty bloody well when it comes to the actual amount of money that is formally earned by the taxpayers. They're doing remarkably well. So effectively, we earned just on 300 billion Rand more than we did the year before. And remember that this is the money that is created up at the top that can and does flow down into the informal market. So if more money is made at the top, that money will eventually flow down. It's a good thing. It might be a story that says that we're not looking after the right people enough. But my argument would be, without these people doing well, it's going to be increasingly hard to look after those people at the bottom of the triangle. Okay, so the last piece of this story that I want to just, because you might have noticed I haven't even got into BrandMapp data yet, but it is important that we have this context, everyone, because it allows us to position the sort of consumer market, both mass and the middle market and up, in a very different way. The result of all of that is that look at what's happened to Mr. Kisweta, our tax guy. This is how what the picture I just showed you translates into his wallet. So 3 years ago, the tax man put an extra 70 billion rand into the coffers. Last year it was 50, and this year it's close to 100 billion rand more that it will be collected in personal taxes. It's an extraordinary story. And it also goes a little bit, I think, towards explaining what's happening here. There is the naysayers or the cynics out there, the conspiracy theorists as well. Or if you listen to Tucker Carlson, you're quite likely to look at this and go, yeah, but that's obviously all theft and grift, and there's corruption and stuff involved in there. Well, it's the strangest group of corrupt people ever who are stealing hundreds of millions and then willing to pay tax. It's like the first criminals in history who willingly give up 43% of everything they've stolen. So I don't think that's true. I think there's a different force at play here. I would love if there are any economists on this call who would like to collaborate and try to unpack and understand this story a little bit more. Please give me a call, because all I'm looking at are the facts and figures, and they tell an extraordinary story about the ability of South Africa to grow in a certain place. And we do see it. We see evidence of it. We see evidence of it in the malls that are popping up all over South Africa. To a degree, we see evidence in the automotive sales, which, although they're not as good as we would like them to be, they're still nowhere near the depths that we hit after 2018. It's still holding its head. And we see it in strange places. So with deference to my clients and friends at Clicks, this is not supposed to be a rude comment. It's just that I remember we started reading what was going on at Clicks, and I actually said this. I mean, it was just a turn of phrase. It's like, guys, what are Clicks smoking? What do they know that everybody else doesn't know? If the economy is tanking, consumers are under pressure, etc., what on earth are they doing? Because back in 2022, they opened 58 new stores and 52 new pharmacies. In 2023, it was 45 new stores, 38 new pharmacies, and they have ambitions to do exactly the same thing again this year. So I don't think a corporation that touches somewhere near 80% of the BrandMapp audience as a brand, I don't think that they would be investing to this degree and increasing their footprint to this degree if they didn't believe that the market out there was available. It's like putting a McDonald's store out there. They don't do it unless they know there are going to be enough people walking by to buy enough Big Macs to keep the brand alive and well. So there are indicators out there. Go and look for this kind of information to create really good context behind any of the stories that you're going to be telling out of data in the coming year. And so Mike's little sort of just a statement of intent or fact. I do believe that what this whole story tells me is that if the tide can just turn in South Africa, if we can find a political institution or political setup that genuinely has the people's interests at heart, that wants to behave like tender-loving parents rather than vultures and cockroaches, I do think that there is potential for things to get better very, very quickly, right? Things can change fast if you have a large enough group of skilled surfers ready to go and ride that wave. Increasing, I know I'm often accused of being a bit of a sunshine economist, which is ironic because I'm definitely not an economist. But I do believe that we need to keep hope alive by understanding that this group of people we're talking about, this top 30%, that the BrandMapp, or we call the BrandMapp audience that our survey talks about, they really haven't, they do still have the potential to help drag the country into a far better future. Okay, that's the soapbox moment over with. Let me jump into some stuff about BrandMapp that we see. So in terms of the desert, the Tatooine flat desert, here's a great example of I've just got two quick things up front to show you about what I'd call a flat desert surface, or very, very small ripples. It feels like it was a year when all of a sudden nothing happened. Here was a great story we put out last year. For the first time ever coming out of COVID, we thought we would try and get a measure on the effect of hybrid working. Have people gone back to the offices or haven't they? So we asked this for the first time. We don't know what it was like pre-COVID. And we got the answer in blue there. That was the stat that we got back. 44% of everybody that we surveyed, 44% of that total top end of the triangle said, I will work all day in a workplace, in an office or a factory. 39% splitting their time, 17% working all day from home, 17% not too far above the entrepreneur percentage that sits within the taxpayer base. So the story that we came out with was, that's really interesting. It's interesting that it feels like the taxpayer segment of South African society is kind of split down the middle. Like half of them can work at home and half of them can't. And the half that can are, and they're really enjoying it. The half that can't, it's becoming a bit of an old joke, but I always say you can't mine platinum from your living room. So if you're mining platinum, if you're trying to sort of carry out dental procedures, if you're trying to teach classes of children in a meaningful, empathetic way, it's very, very hard to do that from your living room. So this idea that everyone can work from home was clearly nonsense. But we discovered that there was a large group of people who had definitely splitting their time or working totally remotely. And then along comes 2023, and look how similar the result is. Yes, there's a slight uptick, like 3% in people going back to working all day in the workforce, but in the office. But I mean, it really is, it's a pretty flat landscape, guys. There may be changes within this in terms of behavior. In other words, the frequency of splitting time, how that time is split, will undoubtedly change. But it feels to me like this is the first indication that we are approaching a new normal, So I guess I was thinking about it this morning and wondering if this is just a theory, that it may be true that what has happened up until the very recent past is that the consumer was adapting his or her behavior to a shifting landscape. And we may now, in the post-COVID moment, have passed through that sort of moment of turbulence in the landscape. And now the consumer's able to, we've made plans, those people who could make a plan against load shedding have. We've changed our behavior in terms of how we work. And now what's happening is it's time for the marketplace to adapt to the new reality of the consumer. That may be a truism. It's a theory I'm working on that I will pursue. But it comes out in this kind of thing. Look how flat that is. Look at this. We asked the question, compared to 2 years ago, how are you feeling financially? I promise you this was pretty volatile. Coming into COVID, coming out of COVID, there was a pretty volatile picture. The last year to now, if anything, look what's happened. There's a slight uptick, like there's a 5% increase on the left-hand side of the graph here. There's an increase in people feeling a bit better off, which, as I've just shown you, is completely explained purely by income levels by more than half of those taxpayers. So there's lots of places where BrandMapp is pretty flat. And as I said, we've now got to go looking for some of the banthas. Or we've got to start looking for the stories that sit inside this data that tell bigger stories. Okay. Question 48, we asked this question: which of the following activities and pastimes are you interested in? We obviously ask a massive array. I've simply pulled out the top 6 here. These are traditionally the top 6. As the years have passed, we've changed the order of these. And the thing that's gone up relatively is travel. It always used to be music, movies, reading, travel, cooking, and now cooking and travel have relatively moved up over the years. It's not a massive shift. It's just an overall kind of interest, an overall metric. And we measure travel now as the second most tick box by these people. I don't think it's certainly not a surprise, because in some ways, travel and the idea of like having something to converse about around the dinner table, or when you're out with your mates and you're having an orange juice, being able to talk about the world and travel and what you learn by traveling, it really is the ultimate social currency, and it remains that for the vast majority of South Africans, both those who come with a traditional legacy of sort of wealth and access to travel, and more importantly, to the more aspirational, new to category consumers who are coming through, who understand that being able to talk about something like travel is super cool, right? So we asked this question. We've always asked this question. I'm just giving you a 4-year trend here. So what's interesting about this is you'll see I've asterisked 2021. We're simply measuring which of these flights have you taken. We're trying to get a gross measure on the degree to which people are able to fly. The reason why 2021 is so messy is because we actually had to change the question. Coming out of COVID, we had to ask, which of these flights do you expect to take in the year to come. Okay, so we got a measure on expectation, which was really interesting because you can see how thumping down to the blue of 2022, our travel habits were certainly not fulfilled. Last year, I was telling the story that one of the great, if I just had enough money to invest in a sector, I'd invested in the travel sector because it looked like there was a big old bump coming. The desire, the level of desire was absolutely massive. Look at I have not flown and how much that desire did not get fulfilled. Okay, so we just didn't manage to get off the ground again in the year we wanted. But what I think is really interesting is actually when you eliminate those two middle ones and you look at it like this, that is going effectively what we were doing before COVID and where we're at now. Geez, we are coming very, very, very close. We're coming very close to being back to pre-COVID days. So to me, that simply tells us, it sort of backs up this possible theory that, what's happened is we've had those massive turbulent times. The consumer completely adapted in whatever way that was. We sold cars, we got inverters or candles, or we've done whatever we can, and it feels like we're very, very fast approaching a new normal where some things like this will very much go back to what they were because that desire to travel just simply hasn't changed. Okay, moving from travel into a more sort of a broader category where we see some interesting stuff happening. So the end of the story is probably, I think, one of the biggest stories that we see in the data this year. It's certainly one of the biggest banthas on our Tatooine BrandMapp planet. But the story starts here. So I'm just going to hopefully give you an idea of how we can use these sort of longitudinal views of the data and the fact that it's a 10-year-old study with at least 4 years that have been really, really consistent. And it allows us to tell some really interesting stories, I think. So what has happened in the total grocery segment? Grocery is obviously a huge part of consumer life. The battle of the aisles, as I call it, it's pretty hectic. And I think it's the last couple of years, I'm not sure it's ever been more, I won't say bloody. That's probably pushing it a bit far, but it certainly is. It's an aggressive war out there to try and get an increasing share of consumers' shopping baskets. This is what happens if you add. We asked 2 questions in BrandMapp. Where do you shop for groceries? Where do you shop most often? And then where do you also shop? So we can add all of these things together and we can get sort of total footprints. And this is what the shop anytime for groceries footprints looks like. So you can see some interesting little patterns here over 4 years. The sort of, I would give them those kind of shapes. We see a slight decline here. Pick n Pay, remember, was coming off such a massive base 10 years ago. Checkers seems to have done something sort of a little right. Spar's had an interesting kind of journey. I think a little bit price related, possibly with consumers looking to cut costs. Woolworths had a really amazing COVID was great for Woolies, great for those little stores down the road. And ShopRite's looks like it's sort of on a journey, probably riding the coattails of Checkers as a bit of a legacy brand. But where the story really actually gets interesting is when you apply exactly the same thing to the most often shopped graph, because that's what most often shopped looks like. So it's exactly the same shapes, but now we start to squeeze out what's really happened here. And it feels like everybody else is benefiting from a general kind of decline. Pick n Pay's got its work absolutely cut out for it. I think that it'd be super interesting to see how they respond, because Checkers, you can see what's happened. They've done something super, super right 2 years ago. They've maintained that place. Some of the others, Woolies has kept going. The point is, I think it's always important to know exactly how to compare different data points within the same data set. Yeah. And for me, I love the idea that you've got a slight hint of a story over here, and over here you've got a really amazing story saying, wow, whatever Checkers have done, they've done something super right to reach and to sustain their position as the #1 most often grocery shopped in that top piece of the triangle. So once we've asked these questions, especially this one, where do you do most of your grocery shopping? The next question we ask is, why do you do most of your grocery shopping there? And I am building up to my Bantha moment. This isn't it yet. The things we sort of ask are in this realm, like it's for lowest prices, it's for best quality. You'll see that in 2021, that best quality spike coincided with a spike at Woolworths, because I think a lot of people weren't spending money outside of groceries, so they put that money back into more premium goods. But you can see the story here, guys. There's nothing very interesting here. The reasons why people buy groceries most often haven't changed that much in this big picture, but it has changed in three very, very specific ways. And again, these are not Bantha moments, but they definitely trend graphs that are hard to ignore when you start looking at data. So three different things. First of all, on the right-hand side, best special offers getting much, much more important. If you look over 4 years, now that 7% shift starts becoming interesting. Same thing goes for best loyalty program. We unpacked on Friday last week. We had the launch of the Truth BrandMapp Moya app loyalty white paper. If any of you are interested in loyalty and you want to know what's happened in the whole loyalty landscape, it's a free download. Go and download it from our website. Really fascinating to see the impact of loyalty at this crucial time of sort of shifting sands. And the best loyalty program, it's definitely been driven by the arrival of checkers and just ongoing sort of activity in that grocery loyalty sector. So super interesting report. Go and download it. But for the point of today, we see loyalty becoming more important. We see special offers. And then we see this really interesting thing where most convenient location seems to have taken a bit of a dive. And that made me start wondering, geez, I wonder what are the different things that can influence the fact that somewhere is convenient to get to as being a major driver of most often shopping. So why is convenience not as important as it was? Well, there are loads of reasons, okay, that could possibly be true. But the first one I went to was this, same-day grocery delivery services. Which of them do you use at least once a month? So we only asked this question for the first time in 2021, because in 2020, none of them existed. The only one that had anything, Pick n Pay, had a thing called Bottles, which I think was just a way of delivering sort of booze to desperate people. It was called Bottles. I think it was literally their bottle store. But I mean, effectively, well, certainly Pick n Pay ASAP didn't exist. None of these things existed 4 years ago. So the incredibly rapid growth that we saw in coming out of the COVID year and then into last year made us think, wow, this actually could be a bit of a game changer. We know that 95% of people who sit in the top piece of that triangle are shopping online now since COVID. It used to be 80, now it's 95% of them. So it's not about online shopping. This is a very specific thing. This is about grocery delivery. This is about not getting in my car and driving down to a shop to get everything from toothpaste to vegetables. And the question was, if something can go from 0 to a 19% footprint in a calendar in just sort of 2 years, what on earth is going to happen now in the landscape where the brand has to respond to the consumer need? And the answer is it's gone absolutely ballistic. That growth, to me, I'm not sure. I think we saw similar growth to this in fiber to the home during COVID. It was the only, which is incredibly extenuating circumstances. This is just on a desert landscape, man. Like, how big is that Bantha? It's absolutely insane. 31% footprint. Massively meaningful. What's equally interesting is look how the effective growth of Pick n Pay, look at what that's been since launch. Woolies Dash and even Spar to You, which is coming off a very, very low base, but it's a 300% growth in a calendar year. It's pretty massive. So this is the fact. The insight in here, I think, is kind of potentially interesting, because I just keep wondering to what degree this new thing that's arrived, where people have got so used to this service, and there are excuse me, there are groups we can find where the impact of this is even more radical. So if I look at female shoppers who generally over-index for grocery shopping, who most often shop at Checkers, that number goes up to 52%. So more than half of all most often grocery shopper and the Checkers consumer base, 52% of them are using Checkers 60/60 regularly. If I think about how this impacts the general consumer mindset across everything, right? It doesn't matter doesn't matter what you're selling, what product or service you're selling. If you don't understand or take cognizance of the fact that the consumer is being constantly trained to not just to get what they want pretty much when they want it. And in this case, it's like within an hour. So one of my little mantras for the year is when it comes to online shopping, is 3 to 5 days delivery still relevant? Can it possibly still give you a competitive edge in a consumer environment that is increasingly believing and being proved to, and it's proved true to them that they can get what they want in under an hour? I think it's an absolute game changer, and can't wait to see how this develops over the coming years. Okay, let's shift gears completely. I've got one more little story and one more chart to share with you today. This is it's a similar story, because I guess I'm going to keep reiterating it. It might sound a bit like a stuck record, but I do believe that in these flat consumer landscapes, the power balance has shifted. It was the consumer reacting to the environment. Now I think the environment needs to react to the consumer. And there are a few places we've seen that happen. And what I'm about to show you is a slightly silly story. I'm quite cynical about it, and I have been quite rude about it. But I'm not going to be rude or cynical about it. I'm going to try and tell you the absolute straight story about how a simple product that is dropped into the marketplace at the right time, at a time when people are time starved. Time is our greatest resource as an economy, or as people who are active in the economy. What happens if you drop the right product into the right time? So this is a part in the data where we put the measurements in so that we can calculate an SEM score for respondents, right? And you've got to ask these questions. Do you have a microwave oven? Do you have a washing machine, a car, side-by-side fridge? This is all how you land up with the SEM calculations. But obviously, because it's our survey and we can do what we want, we drop some interesting things into this. So we also dropped in like a security service, a home security service. We also dropped in a swimming pool. And what we dropped in 2 years ago was an air fryer. I did it because I was hoping that there'd be an interesting story that I could tell about how easy even these highly educated people were to convince that you could fry in air. Because just for the record, you can't. You can only fry in hot oil. So you can put oil onto something that you put in hot air and fry it, but you can't just fry with hot air. Not possible linguistically. Look it up in the Collins-Webster Dictionary. It started off as a bit of a joke, and then I've realized that actually it's an incredibly important data point to understand. That is a pretty radical shift year on year. For a basic necessity in life like cooking, for a habit to shift like this is insane. And this footprint is absolutely backed up by the retailers. There were the Takealots and Yuppie Chefs of this world. I mean, those air fryers are the air flyers. They're just flying out the door. They've done incredibly well. They've made a massive footprint. What probably tells the story even better, though, is this view of it. So if I go back to last year, and what I do, it's just it's also just a good example sometimes of how to use data and the cross-tabbing tool that Telmar provides you. You can start telling very, very interesting stories if you do simple crosstabs. So all I've done here is I've taken household income groups along the bottom. Now that we know that the total footprint was sitting at last year, let me go back one. It was 28% in this year, right? So the 30 to 40K, which is just on the threshold of average income on the upper side, that's where the 28% sits. So what this meant was, if you go into a household that earns between 10 and 15,000 rand, only 13% of them had bought air fryers. You had to go all the way up to the wealthiest income segments, 100K plus, to find a really big footprint. And there it was still under half. Okay, so last year, fewer than half of all taxpayers still fried had an air fryer. The majority were frying in oil. What happened last year? Well, this is what the chart looks like for 2023. So exactly the same thing. You can see that the take-up in the lower household income segments, it's only up to 23. But the moment you hit 40,000 rand household income, so the moment you get into the top of that triangle, it's now a fact that, well, I'm saying top end is full of hot air, but the fact here is that you're more likely to find an air fryer in one of those households than not. You know, what's the story? Well, as I said, I think if you find the right product, if you can tap into the market in South Africa, the top piece of this triangle, in extraordinary ways. There is still resilience. There's still aspiration. There is still a lot of business to be done, even in rather turbulent times. Yeah. And the last thing I will share with you is a slide about media. So I focused on this webinar on quite a lot of that upfront stuff because, as I said, I hope that you're all with me in believing that context is incredibly important in the current consumer landscape. Things shift so fast, and if you don't have that context up front, you'll believe and you'll read and you'll interpret everything that you read in the news and in the media with the wrong sort of a set of lenses on, you know. So I really think it was important. I'm sorry if some of you found it a little tedious, but I do think it's important. In a week's time, I'm going to be doing an update on the media side, and I'm not going to talk about all that stuff. I'm literally going to be talking about the shifts in media that we see, which are fascinating this year. And I'm going to give you a little tidbit of it just to whet your appetite. So social media, we all know, is still a driving force in the South African context. It still takes massive chunks out of the media and advertising budgets. And obviously, the best way, you know, we can't track it as well as these platforms can track themselves. So we simply ask the question like this: which of these platforms do you regularly use? And back in 2021, that's what it looked like. Instagram had a really good year coming out of COVID, had a nice big bump. I think a lot of people used Instagram. It was a COVID, or it was I'm in prison in lockdown in my house friendly kind of platform. And this little new thing called TikTok had kind of come to the fore. And we measured it at 18%. And at the time, we said, you know, well, it's really just for kids, you know, and absolutely in the data that showed. So what happened in the following year? Well, in the following year, pretty much everything else in the social space stayed relatively normal. You know, we saw a little Instagram return to its previous level. Twitter seemed to lose a little bit of bite. Pinterest, LinkedIn, so, but TikTok did a little jump, you know. And we saw that jump and went 18 to 28 is actually a significant, that's a significant move up. And I had this clocked at a possible Bantha moment in the BrandMapp 23 data. So an anecdotal story about this is that you know, if we're sitting in these environments where we just have a preconception about what people are using and how they're using it, it's like Facebook. You know, I'm very close to starting to classify Facebook as traditional media, along with television, radio, and newspapers. You know, I think it's traditional media. I think that young people are only on Facebook to see what their parents are up to, personally. And I think old people are still on Facebook because it's the only social media platform that they still know how to use. But you've got to be very careful about understanding where these things fit in, because this is what's happened in a calendar year with that little TikTok platform. So in the BrandMapp audience, while everything else has remained reasonably flat, that TikTok footprint has gone absolutely through the roof, and I only see it getting more interesting. If you want to see or read about an interesting story, I did a presentation the other day putting the Stanley Cup, you know, this famous Stanley Cup, this huge thing that keeps your drinks cold. You know, you're talking about a product and a brand that has gone in America from a 70 million rand a year company to like almost R1 billion a year in sales. You know, the story is insane, and it is 100% attributed to TikTok. TikTok was the platform that has taken that brand on its 5-year journey as a platform. So yeah, we got to be very careful about about these banthas. They can be big and dangerous, or they can be incredibly exciting to ride. And I think this TikTok one is really interesting. Just for what it's worth, if you apply a filter of sort of male C-suite executives in the highest earning income brackets, that number still sits around 20%. It doesn't sit at naught. Yeah. Okay, so that's a little tidbit for next time. I'm going to leave you with a simple thought, guys. Data for me, we're entering an incredibly interesting year. I think May the 28th is going to. It's definitely the most pivotal. It's the pivotal election that we've had since 1994. We have no real idea yet what's going to happen. I was at the Daily Maverick gathering the other day, and when you've got the best minds in politics all sitting on a stage and no one really has any idea where things are going to go in 2 months. I think it's very important that those of us who are working and operating in the consumer environment and the consumer landscape heed the words of my old friend here, Yoda. I won't put on the voice, but famous quote of his that I love: "In a dark place we find ourselves, and a little more knowledge lights our way."